got a great film to play,
Hello? Have you ever snubbed a lady?
we had a technical problem.
Are we on?
Yeah, we're on there.
Can I swear? Shit!
Welcome to Crunch and Roll, tales from the dysfunctional world of radio, told by the people who have been there, done that, and I've got a selection of mic muffs on display on the mantelpiece with other people's spit all over them. I'm John Fox, and in a former life, I spent 2 decades presenting breakfast shows on BRMB, Signal 1, Viking FM, 210 FM, and a few shows here and there on BBC Radio WM. Now, I'm proud of that list of stations I just mentioned, but my guest on this episode knocks it into a cocked hat. Golden Age Kiss 100, check. Original Virgin Radio working for Chris Evans, check. Heart Network, check. The mighty BRMB and also the first voice on Free Radio, check. Sexy New Virgin Radio, check. Despite his success, he is a little bit of a rebel. He set up a pirate station at his school, was present during an Ofcom raid, and accidentally got off his nut at the Sonys. He also tells us about his disastrous first show in Kiss, being the manager of a major artist and the mad reason for losing his heart gig. Now, before we start, if you do enjoy the podcast, we're always eternally grateful for any support that you can give us on Ko-fi. Now, of course, we've said before, we do this podcast for the love of radio and also the incredible characters that we get on. But there are a few costs tucked away here and there, not to mention the cost for Simon's wig. So any help that you can give us is always gratefully appreciated. Just go to ko-fi.com/crunch and roll. I thank you. Right, let's crunch and roll. Oh, yeah. James, how are you?
I'm very well. It's lovely to see your face, although you're in the dark.
Yes, I'm in the playroom in our mansion, and this is the only place where. Can I just say, I'm in the playroom, and this is the only place where you potentially won't hear my girls making an absolute racket. And the reason why we've recorded your episode, James, slightly earlier than everybody else on the planet is to fit around your. Am I right in thinking your children are at swimming right now, so they won't make a racket? Is that right?
That's absolutely right, yeah. So they're at swimming. They'll be back in about an hour. So if we go on for longer than that, they may well walk in.
What I love about it is that there's another human being on this planet that goes through the same turmoil with noisy children as me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. When we bought this place, we carved a little space out in the loft, and my son, my 7-year-old son, has got a room next door, and I try and do some recording from home in this office, but it's impossible when he's back home and he's kicking footballs against the wall, and it's like.
All right then, James. Well, it's lovely to see you after so many years, many years. Where are you from originally?
I'm from London, from West London, born in Hammersmith, and then I've spent most of my time in London. Lived in East London for a while, Central London for a while in my bachelor days, and then now I've got a wife and a couple of kids. I've moved back to West London, it's in sort of East Sheen, which is near leafy Richmond Park.
Sounds very nice.
It
really
is.
Nice. Now, where did your passion for radio start then, James?
Well, I was thinking about this. I mean, I've been into radio for as long as I can remember. Like, my parents bought me a little radio when I was sort of 7 or 8. But I think what really sort of fired things up for me was I had a radio with a cassette player on, and it had a record button. And I used to listen to audiobooks and things like that. And one day, I remember trying to press this record button, and it wouldn't work. And I didn't know why. But at the time, it was because with cassette tapes, you had that little square in the corner, which you had to cover up with a bit of, sticky tape in order to record over the tapes. But I didn't understand this when I was 7 or 8. But I just pressed this record button particularly hard. And then it obviously overrode that, and it started recording. And I realized that I was recording my own voice. And this kind of epiphany moment happened when I listened back to the tape and realized that instead of the audio tape that I'd bought and was listening to, I was listening to my own voice waffling on. And this was just a moment for me. And I was like, oh my God, I can record myself and then listen back. And that was kind of like the catalyst for me.
And can you remember, because growing up in London, you had some incredible stations to listen to. Were you a Capital fan?
The first station that I remember listening to was Radio Mercury. And I've got this recording because when I worked out how to record myself, and I worked out how to record the radio, and I started recording things. And I've got this recording of Howard Pierce on Radio Mercury doing his sound check show, introducing the chicken song. Was it the Spitting Image? Is it the chicken song? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I've got that, and I used to listen to that, and that it was Radio Mercury that got me into it. But then there was Capital, obviously, which was much more local, and Radio 1, and I was always more of a commercial radio fan. I was a real Capital fan when I was growing up, and listening to Chris Tarrant on breakfast when I was going to school, and then Pat Sharp and Dr. Fox and all those kind of legends for me.
And how did you initially start your radio career? Because interestingly, on the prep that we've got, and as I know you're a regular to Crunch and Roll, you'll know that sometimes our research is not spot on. But I think in 1993, you set up a pirate radio station.
Yeah, that's right. So I went to a boarding school. And at the boarding school, I did there was an electronics class, and you had to make something in your electronics class. And just sort of rewinding quickly, I watched this film called Pump Up the Volume, which was a film with Christian Slater in it. And he was this DJ, and he was broadcasting to his school. And I thought that seemed like fun. And he was kind of like, he was a bit of an introverted kid, but in the film, he's broadcasting to his school, and he gets a bit of a reputation for this pirate radio station. The people at school love it. And I thought, this is what I want to do. And in this electronics class, we had to build something. And in the back of a catalogue, an electronics catalogue, there was an advert for a radio transmitter kit. Now, it's fine to advertise, apparently, a radio transmitter kit in the back of an electronics catalogue. It's fine to buy a radio transmitter kit from the back of a catalogue. It's fine to build the radio transmitter kit. I'm not quite sure it's fine to use it, but anyway, I bought it and made it, and yeah, I broadcast to my school, which was a lot of fun.
So, I mean, talk me through. Was it just you on air? Were you doing 24/7 James Merritt?
No, it was me. Well, it was kind of my thing because I set it up, but then I brought friends on board as well, and we made little sketches and things like that. So we'd do things like we would record the headmaster going on to the local radio station and doing an interview with BBC Radio Solent, I think it was, and he would talk about the school. And we recorded that, and then we would cut it up. We'd splice it up with inappropriate questions of our own. And so the headmaster would be, saying all these inappropriate things about other teachers and about the school environment and about all this sort of stuff. And we just made these sketches. And we called the station Radioactive, which was named after a BBC Radio 4 comedy show at the time. And they had all these kind of cheesy jingles. This Radio 4 show had all these cheesy jingles, which we ripped and then played as our own jingles to give us some sort of station sound. And there was an internal phone system for the school as well. And so people could phone up from different houses, and I'd put other people on the air, and I'd have chats with people, and we'd do competitions and stuff like that. And yeah, it was so exciting. Although there was this one time when I remember this girl who was quite a hot girl came up to me. She didn't know who I was, but you knew where the radio station was, and she found me. And when she saw who I was, she was like, "Oh," because I think in her mind there was this voice, this deep voice on the radio who was like this. She obviously, I don't know, had a bit of a crush on the voice or whatever. And then she met me, and she's like, "Oh, right."
Oh, believe me, James, I've been through that moment many, many times, mate. That's when people have met me and gone, "Oh, Jesus."
Face for radio.
yeah. So hang on, I'm trying to get my head around this. So was your pirate radio station, Radioactive, was that endorsed by the school?
No.
Were they aware of...
No, not at all.
Surely they knew who you were, though.
Yeah, well, it didn't last too long. Well, it sort of went in two waves. I did it once for a few weeks, and I got sort of ticked off for doing it, caught for doing it, ticked off for doing it. And I sort of was told, just, don't do that anymore. Put that to bed. And so I did put it to bed until the sixth form when I'd done my A-levels. And I was kind of like, right, done my A-levels. I'm finished here. Let's set up the station again. So I launched it again and had another week or so on the air. And then they heard it again and they suspended me, which is fine. And in the week that I got suspended, I got my first paid job in radio. So they kicked me out of school, and just coincidentally, my first paid job in radio came along. So I kind of segued quite nicely from pirate student radio, if you like, to actually having a job.
So are we talking about Virgin Megastore Radio?
Yeah. So did you ever listen to Nick Abbott when he was on Virgin Radio back in the 90s?
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah.
The best. Like that, and that's also where I got the kind of bug from. I used to listen to him, and I used to phone him up and religiously every night I used to listen to him. And his producer, a guy called Clint Bell, was also running Virgin Megastore's radio. And one evening on his show, I just caught the end of Clint saying something like, "So if you want to be a DJ, drop me a line." And that's all I heard. So I rang him up because I knew the radio station phone number. Rang him up, spoke to Clint. Clint said, "Oh yeah, we're looking for presenters for Virgin Megastore's radio." And he said, "If you want to do it, if you want to have a crack at it, just send me a demo tape." So I went out, bought a mixing desk, bought a microphone, and I sort of cobbled together what I thought was a demo tape, because I hadn't made one before or done anything like that. And sent it in, didn't hear anything for quite a while. But then while I was away at school, Clint had rung my home number in London. And my dad picked up, and Clint said, "Oh, is James there?" And my dad said, "No." He said, "Oh, well, don't worry about it. It doesn't matter. I've missed him. It's fine." My dad said, No. What's it about? I'll get him to call you back. And so he did, and I called him back, and he invited me in, in that week that I was suspended, invited me in to do a sort of live demo in the Virgin Megastore. And that was kind of it. I got the job.
So, I mean, because we've had a few guests on Crunch and Roll who spent time at Virgin Megastore Radio.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of top caliber presenters went through there, started there. Who else was there when you arrived?
Yeah, well, you had Ian Camfield on, didn't you? Ian
Yes.
Camfield was there. A guy called Paul Wisdom was there. He worked at BFBS for a while. And then actually Nick Abbott himself was there, because by this time, Nick had been given the boot from Virgin Radio, I think possibly for the first time. I think he worked there twice. So he was kicked out, and he went to work back at Virgin Megastore's radio. So I kind of met my idol on the first day. It's like
Amazing.
And he's become a mate. Like, I'll see him a couple of times a year.
So talk to me about your experience. I mean, was it a good place to learn the craft at Virgin Megastore?
I think it was possibly the best possible place I could have learned my craft, to be honest, because it was run as if it was a professional radio station, a professional broadcast radio station. It had some really good presenters on it, but also at the top of the hour, they would do the news, and we'd have a minute of entertainment news, and the presenter would have to read that. And then every 15 minutes, we'd have an advert break. You got to play pretty much everything. So you'd have to play pretty much all the singles that came out every week, and tracks from all the new albums that came out every week, and the songs that were being promoted. So there'd be certain albums and singles that were being promoted, which you'd have to play a little bit more, but you got to play everything. And you could also go out into the store and walk around the store and pick up a CD and take it back and play it. You could play whatever you like. I mean, there were certain things you had to play, but you could pretty much play everything. And I was thinking about this earlier. There were certain songs, if I liked a particularly great dance track or something, if I latched onto a tune, if I hammered it on Virgin Megastore's radio and then looked at the charts the next week, I would see that song go up in the charts.
No, really?
And yeah, certainly, because the people that were in the Virgin Megastore were obviously active music buyers. And this this wasn't just in one, this was in 92 Virgin stores around the country. So it was quite a big audience. And if you were on at, midday on a Saturday, something like that, the stores would be packed. And broadcasting to 92 packed stores, if you played a song, it would shift some units. And I love the power of that. I thought that was so exciting.
Cunty.
We apologise, sir.
We just play records till 8, 9. When do we finish?
I'm not drunk. I've had a couple of drinks. I'm not drunk.
So you spend 3 years at Virgin Megastore, and then you get your gig at Virgin Radio. Was Virgin Megastore a breeding ground for Virgin? Was it a place for the bosses at Virgin to listen to up and coming talent?
No, it wasn't really. So there was a couple of other things that sort of went between VMR and Virgin Radio. So I did some student radio. I ran a student radio station for a couple of years because I was doing VMR at the same time as doing a media degree. So I did that student radio for a little bit. And then also I did a little bit of work at Talk Radio UK, because Nick Abbott was there. He moved there after a while, and I did a bit of production work, tech op work, phone op work, and that sort of stuff. And that was so I was doing all these things at once and trying to juggle as many things as possible, earn a little bit of money while being a student and all that. But then in 1999, when I'd finished my media degree, there was an advert in the radio magazine. Do you remember the radio magazine?
I do, yeah. I miss it. I miss it.
Oh, it's good. So I used to buy that, and there was an advert in there. They were looking for a programming and production assistant at Virgin Radio. And that job was just sort of sitting in the programming department and writing liners for DJs to say. It was putting the adverts onto carts, making sure the promos were all in the right place. It was just a general dog's body for the programming department, basically. I got an interview for that job, and I remember the crunch question was, because they had loads of people that wanted to work at Virgin Radio. The crunch question was something like, so you tick all the right boxes. You obviously you've done radio, you've done a degree, you've done this and you've done that, but how can you show us that you're actually like a normal person? How can you show us that you'll fit in with the Virgin ethos? Because they had this kind of party ethos going at Virgin. And I said, well, I was at Glastonbury Festival last week. Will that do? And they said, yes, you got the job.
I'm interested because a few people have mentioned that ethos, that party ethos at Virgin. Why? Have you got any memories from that period of time? Was it completely party central?
Yeah. So I mean, I lasted doing that job for 2 weeks, and then they not that I got fired. The guy who was in control at the time was Jeff Holland. The program director was Jeff Holland, and he got rid of about 3 or 4 presenters within the space of a day or 2 days. He just had this cull for some reason. And then they realised they didn't have anybody to do the evening show. So it's like, he came to me and he said, well, you've done some radio before, haven't you? You've been on the air before. Would you like to do the evening show? I was like, yeah, all right, fine. So they split AM and FM, and they had somebody else doing FM in London. And my first proper radio show on broadcast radio that I was paid for was national Virgin Radio, which is insane.
That's amazing. And I always ask this question, I mean, especially because it was national as well. Can you remember your emotions on that first day?
Yeah, I was bricking it.
Yeah, we all were. It's a horrible, isn't it? Because you're chasing your dream, and then suddenly it's there, this opportunity. And it's at that point where, I mean, I remember my first ever professional show 5 minutes before, absolutely filling my pants. There's nothing more nervous than doing that, is there?
No, totally. That was exactly the same for me. I was absolutely bricking out. I felt physically sick, but you can't turn it down. If somebody says, well, do you want to do it? You're like, well, of course. So the rest of the day was a little bit of a blur, but 7 o'clock rolled round and I did it, and I just kept it I crunched and rolled, John. I really did. It was all very, very tight and bright. And I didn't keep the evening show, but they did stick me on overnights for about 3 years. So,
but do you know what? We've had quite a few guests as well who spent many years on overnights, and I've done it myself as well. It's a very unique place to be, isn't it, when you're on the radio?
Yeah, I mean, you learn a lot at that sort of time. You can mess about. It's a playpen, really, and they gave you the they gave you the sort of the leash to do that, or the room to do that. You know, I could go on and say silly things and you know, I just have a laugh with it, really, and that's what it was. But to talk about the party atmosphere, I mean, yeah, it really was all the time. There was partying going on. The station was based in Soho, so in the middle of Soho, Golden Square, and people would go out and go drinking and whatever, and then they'd come back late at night, you know, after they'd been out, and there was no problem with that. These days, there'd probably be a security guard telling you that you can't come back to the radio station if you're plastered. But at the time, they were like, no, fine, come in, that's all right, whatever. And so, I mean, the things that I saw through the studio window at sort of 1, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, yeah, there was a lot of partying going on.
Do you know, you've just reminded me of one of the most horrific moments in my career when I got absolutely smashed in Birmingham and thought that was the time to take one of my best mates, Simon Green, who's a wonderful character, to go and meet Tim Shaw doing his show live on BRMB.
Right.
And I made an absolute whopper of myself because I was just so pissed. But you know what? I don't know if you remember Tim Shaw, but he would encourage that. He'd be like, come in, do some links. And I'm thinking, well, hang on, this could end my career quite quickly. So, I mean, I'm really intrigued by this next move. So you do 3 years at Virgin, which you start your professional career on national radio, James, which is just an absolute dream for many. And then in 2001, you go to the mighty Kiss.
Yeah. So, well, I left Virgin because Paul Jackson came in. And I actually survived quite a few. You know, when a new PD comes into a radio station, it's like, okay, right, the writing's on the wall for a lot of people. They want to make a lot of changes. But I actually survived quite a few. So I survived Jeff Holland, and then Bobby Hayne, and then Henry Owens, and then Paul Jackson comes in. And I had a friend who'd worked with Paul at BRMB, and he phoned me up once he heard that Paul was moving to Virgin Radio, and he said, pack your bags because you're going.
Did he?
Yeah. And he was right. He said, everybody is going. And pretty much everybody did go. There was 1 or 2 people. I think Leona Graham survived the axe and Pete and Jeff survived the axe, but almost everybody else, I think, was axed from Virgin within the period of about a year.
No.
Because that's just, you know, that was, and I quite like Paul, and I had a beer with him in Australia a couple of years ago, and he's a nice guy, but at the time he just wanted to clear out everybody and have his own, you know, new broom. Yeah, so I went to Kiss via K Radio.
Okay.
K Radio was a radio station that Andy Roberts was running. They were looking, I think EMAT were looking to get the license for the East Midlands, I guess it would have been. I'm not sure which one it was, but they were doing an RSL to try and get a license. And they created this radio station called K Radio, which was, even the jingles said, what does the K stand for? And the K, I guess, was probably a cross between Kiss and Kerrang, because the station was a mixture of both. It played a few songs that Kiss played, a few songs that Kerrang played, and it had this 28-day RSL based in Peterborough. And so I commuted up to Peterborough, and it was in an old office building because, you know, EMAP had loads of magazines and things like that. And they had this office building in Peterborough, which was completely derelict, totally empty. And you go up to the 5th floor, and on this totally open plan floor, there was a tiny little glass building, room in the corner. And that was the room that they put K Radio in. So it's like it was the middle of nowhere, and it felt very strange going in. But there was 3 presenters: breakfast guy, mid-morning guy, and the drive time guy. I think I was doing mid-mornings, and we actually got raided by Ofcom.
Did you?
Because someone had complained about this K Radio station that had just appeared on the air. I don't know whether it was the people at Herald FM or who it was that was having a moan, but someone complained about it, and I think it was Ofcom or whoever was before Ofcom, and they raided the radio station. Fortunately, I wasn't on the air. It was the guy after me, the drive time guy. For some reason, they had put the frequency down incorrectly in the application. And so when Ofcom or whoever it was did their double checks to check whether there was actually a radio station supposed to be on the air in Peterborough on this frequency, they didn't find it because the frequency had been written wrong. And so they raided the radio station, and the poor guy that was doing the drive time show had an absolute heart attack because he'd been in this building on his own and then gets stormed by these Ofcom people who are accusing him of being a pirate radio station or whatever. Yeah.
So this was all being backed by EMAP at the time as well.
So yes, this was all backed by EMAP. Andy Roberts was the PD, although he was working from London, and I never really met Andy Roberts at that point. But it was a really good way of getting under Andy's nose and doing 28 days worth of demos for him, effectively. And then when that wrapped up, I spoke to him and he brought me into KISS and he tried me out on KISS and got a gig on KISS, which was really nice. So that worked out quite well.
Was KISS ever on your radar? Because, I mean, it was such a unique station, wasn't it? I mean, I thought it was an incredible radio station.
Yeah, I hadn't really listened to it, if I'm absolutely honest.
Oh, pretty James, that's awful.
I know. But I'd worked at, because I'm much more a kind of, I was into Britpop. Like when I did VMR, it was the middle of the Britpop time, right? And so we played Oasis and Blur and Suede and all these bands came in and we did interviews and things like that at the time. And so that was the sort of music that I was really into. And and when I listened to the radio, I listened to a lot of Capital, and I've never really sort of come across KISS. But KISS was changing, and it was the station that I joined was not the KISS that was maybe there beforehand, to a lot of people's displeasure, I think. A lot of people that the original KISS crew were not happy with the changes, I think, that maybe Andy made to make it more commercial, and probably not too happy about some of the presenters that followed. So the KISS that I joined was probably not the KISS that a lot of people grew up listening to. And actually what KISS became was much more up my street, if you like. Because I'm all for big commercial radio stations. I like, the big competitive stations, and we were going right up against Capital at the time, and actually we beat them on occasions. The station, I think particularly in the 15 to 24s, had a period while I was there where the station was beating Capital, and it was a great lineup. You had Bam Bam on breakfast. I followed him, did mid-mornings, and then you had Chris Phillips, and then Robin Banks on drive, and Jez Wellham in the evening. And I thought that was a pretty good lineup.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing lineup.
And great to be part of. And I learned so much from particularly Robin, actually, who is the sort of person that likes to impart his knowledge.
As you may know, he was the first ever guest on Crunch and Roll. And I was desperate to get Robin on because he taught me a lot as well. He'll openly admit he was an absolute knob to me when he was live on air because he was playing the part of Robin Banks. But off air, he is a delightful human being who is willing to share his experience, which I was really grateful of that. I thought he was incredible.
Yeah, he's a sweetheart. And I remember there was one time when he called me up at about midnight and he was like, "Do you want to learn about radio?" I'm like, "Okay, fine." And so I went up to town. I went up to central London at midnight, getting the last tube or something to get up there. And we sat in the KISS studios for 3 or 4 hours overnight. And he just talked radio at me, and he would tell me little tricks and tips and hints and things that he had picked up over the years that he just wanted to share, and to try and help make me a better presenter, I think. So I'm always really grateful for that. He was he would push me to try things, and I picked up the art of doing phone calls from him. Pre-recording phone calls, quickly editing them, turning them around, and banging them out. And yeah, I learned a lot from Robin.
I've already asked you about your emotions doing your first ever professional gig, but how did you feel, and how was that first show on KISS for you? Well,
to be honest, I'm lucky I survived the first day, because the first show on KISS So I'd been used to doing late night radio. You know, Virgin I always worked late at night. It was overnights. It was kind of, and I sort of slipped into this sort of semi-nocturnal lifestyle. And so the first show I think I did on KISS was, I want to say 10 a.m. in the morning, but it might have even been 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I'm not sure. But I overslept.
No.
Yeah. And I got a call as the show was starting from Chris Phillips, who was on before me. And he said, mate, where are you? And I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, you're on the radio. And he woke me up, right? But you're on the radio now. I'm like, oh, shit. It couldn't be a worse start, really, could it? You know, trying to impress the new boss and you oversleep for your first show. So, I mean, I legged it in, but I started my first show an hour late.
Oh, James, that's awful.
Yeah. I mean, I was never late again, as you'd expect after that.
Oh, yeah.
I want to talk about Andy as well, because I don't think any of our guests have really talked about him, but he was really highly regarded in the whole of the industry from my memory, for EMAP, certainly. He was a complete mastermind, wasn't he?
Yeah, Andy's very clever. And he made Rock FM. He was at Rock FM first, wasn't he? And I think he made that sound super hot. And then he was the young genius who they brought to London to do the same thing to KISS. And he did. You know, the station was on fire. He had his background was production. You had these power intros that he would put on the air. So, you know, the songs would really smash into each other and they would just say, it would sound so slick. And we had these great tops of hours, and the music was really focused and upbeat and a nice combination of sort of dance and R&B and hip hop and pop, very poppy. He was very commercial. You know, he probably pushed back some of the specialist programming and just tried to make the station as commercial and big and brash and young as he could. And I think he did that extremely successfully.
It's interesting you saying about KISS and how when you joined the radio station that perhaps the old guard were not in favour and some of the listeners perhaps didn't like the way it was going. But that lineup that you mentioned, yourself and Bam and Robin and Phillips and all those amazing presenters, that for me, that's the memory of KISS that I have got so many fond memories. That lineup, your lineup with you, all those other guys, that's what I wanted to be part of, because I thought the radio station was probably the best in the country. I thought it just for all aspects, the music, the prod, the presenters, the energy, sounding like a salesperson trying to sell it here, but I'm not. It was just an incredible radio station.
Yeah, it was a great thing to be a part of. And Andy was pretty hands-off as far as, you know, telling you what to do. He'd like it tight and he'd like it bright, but he didn't sort of tell you to sort of read a strap line or there was no kind of some of that slightly wanky stuff that can come into radio stations. It was just have fun, and he let you do that. And I think he created, it was a lot of fun to do it. It was a great listen at the time. And I still look back at that. It was, pretty much almost 10 years of great radio, I thought.
And could you feel that? Because, I mean, the aim was fun, young London, wasn't it? Could you feel that as well with KISS? Could you feel the audience were really buying into that?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, the audience, if you said phone up, it would be rammed. And, you know, any other radio station I've worked on, I've never had that sort of response. You know, you ask people to call in and you might get one or two people here or there. But on KISS, call in, all the lines, boom. Everybody wanted to, you know, and that's partly because of the way that people like Bam Bam and Robin trained the audience, you know. There was a lot of people coming on the air, and you could get on the air on KISS. And I think that young people sort of bought into that. So, that was great. The one thing they didn't do, and this is from an off-air point of view, is that the social life at KISS was nowhere near as good as the social life at Virgin. So I used to do my show, and then I would nip down the road to Golden Square and go hang out with the Virgin crew to get to have a drink.
Really?
Yeah, and even after I left Virgin, the people there, Daryl Denham had joined Virgin by that point, and he was a bit of a party animal, and some of his, friends and things like that. So I would hang out with the Virgin crew for a long time, even after I left.
And were you always on mids throughout your whole 10 years at Kiss?
No, I started doing the evening show, and then I got promoted to mids, and then Andrew Jeffries came along.
His nickname was the Duracell Bunny, wasn't it?
Yeah. So, I mean, Andrew Jeffries is a very likable, energetic guy. But I don't think he had the first clue what to do with Kiss.
Right, okay.
Because he'd been at Kerrang! And he'd done Galaxy, I think. And he came in, and at this point, Andy had been sort of promoted up. Like sometimes you get promoted so high, you're not actually in a job anymore. And sort of Andy had been promoted out of his job, I think, to a certain extent. And he was sitting upstairs on the next floor up. And I don't know, in a kind of group role, which I don't know. I'm not sure that's really what he wanted to do. But anyway, he was there. And Andrew Jeffries had been brought in, and I think what he did was probably a good idea in that he did music testing, and the music testing came back that people in London, they like hip-hop and they like R&B. And so he programmed the whole radio station to be kind of a lot more hip-hop and R&B and a bit less pop and dance. And some of those songs were more successful than others. Like I remember I was doing a Saturday lunchtime show, and a song came on that had just gone on the playlist, and it was a track by, do you remember The Game, a rapper called The Game?
Yeah.
He had this new song out called I Want to Put You on the Game, and it was all about sticking your daughter on, to be a prostitute. And the lyrics went something like, I want to put you on the game, gonna put you on the game. And this was going out on Kiss at sort of peak time on Saturday lunchtime. You just imagine mothers and fathers in the car with their little daughters. I'm going to put you on the game. And it's like, oh no. And you could just tell that this was not the right thing to be doing. And the station lost a quarter of its audience in one radar sweep.
Wow.
It was a disaster. And I don't know how. He maybe had one more sweep after that, but he didn't last a year. And then Andy got brought back. He came down from the third floor, and he sort of swept back in and rescued the radio station, turned it round, and then it became a big force again.
I always wondered if Andy was on that third floor and he just had his head in his hands, just going, what the hell is going on downstairs?
I think he probably did. Yeah. And he was right.
Now, of course, that station was part of EMAP, and anybody who we have on Crunch and Roll that spent any time at EMAP, they went through the EMAP Award experience, which we've all got very fond memories of. Have you got any memories of the EMAP Awards?
Everybody loved the EMAP Awards, and I was going with another couple of Kiss DJs who will remain nameless, but you can probably work them out, in a cab to the EMAP Awards. And another presenter in the cab with me got out some brownies that he'd made and offered some brownies to everybody in the cab. You can probably see where this is going even before I tell you the story. Anyway, so I'm like, yeah, I'll have one of your brownies. Thanks very much. So I had one of his brownies. And then I ate it. And he's like, you do know that's a hash brownie, don't you? And I was like, I had no idea. And so we got to the EMAP Awards and the dinner, all the rest of it. And they slowly kicked in, these brownies. And I remember, the point where everybody gets up from the tables and goes to socialise and all the rest of it. And I just was sat at this table and I couldn't move. I wasn't asleep, but I couldn't stand up, really, and I certainly couldn't talk to anybody. And so people were coming to the table that I was just sort of slumped at and sort of saying, hi, all the rest of it. How you doing? And I was like, I can't talk. Honestly, I can't talk. Yeah, that was the EMAP Awards for me.
That's so sad because it was the event of the year for EMAP, wasn't it? And you missed it because you were stoned. Amazing.
And then I was recounting this story at a dinner party a few years later, and we just had some brownies at this dinner party, and I was telling this story. And just when I finished the story, they said, "You do know you've just had some more hash brownies, don't you?" I was like, "Oh, not again."
Oh, you're like Mr. T when he used to have the cheeseburgers because he wouldn't get on the aeroplane.
That's right.
You're like with, yeah.
I just kept getting drugged.
Let's just talk briefly as well about, because during your period at KISS, you got into music management. I'm kind of interested in this because I don't know how you even begin to get into music management. And also one of my greatest bosses whilst I spent my career in radio was Mike Borden.
Yes.
I don't know if you're Mike Borden.
I know Mike, yeah.
He was my MD at Viking. He was one of the biggest inspirations in my career. He was a brilliant boss for me. And of course, he left the industry to go on and manage Paolo Nutini. You also went into music management. How did that begin for you?
Yeah, so when I was at KISS, I did a 3-hour show. I did the mid-morning show for most of the time I was there. And I'd finished by midday. And so the rest of the day, I was like, well, what do I do? You know, it wasn't a particularly difficult show. You didn't have to do loads of prep or anything afterwards, really. So I just had a lot of time to myself, and I was like, well, what am I doing with this time? And I went to a party one evening where I actually bumped into two people. One became my girlfriend for the next year or so, and the other was a music producer who had a studio in West Kensington in sort of West London. And I became friendly with both of these two people. You know how many nights you go out and you go out and nothing happens, or you don't meet anybody of significance in your life. But this one particular night, I go out and meet two people that really had a huge influence on the next few years of my life. Anyway, so the music producer, he had the studio, and we just went out, we had a few beers together, and just the idea sort of came about. We were two lads in our sort of late 20s. It's like, well, let's do something together. You know, I kind of fancy managing a band, and he wanted to write some songs and produce some songs for a band. And we thought, well, what should we do? Let's put together a girl band. Little tip for you, John. If you're going to get into music management, don't manage a girl band.
Oh, really? Why? Tell me.
Well, a girl band is probably the worst thing you can possibly do. Probably the best thing you can do is manage someone like Ed Sheeran. Because Ed Sheeran is a nice, neat package. You know, for Ed Sheeran, he turns up, doesn't matter what he looks like, really, doesn't matter what he's wearing, really, doesn't need any backing or support. He doesn't got any dance routines, and there's no diaries to sync up. With a girl band, and there was 3 people in this girl band, and we called them Stone Fox, which was American slang for a girl who's perfect in every way. You know, she's a stone fox. With a girl band, you have diaries to get to sync up. You have to pay for dance routines, dance lessons. You have to hair and makeup. Hair and makeup is so expensive. It's just, and I didn't know what I was doing, and he didn't really know. My producer didn't really know what he was doing either, and so that was an interesting experience. And then he ran off with one of the girls, and then one of the other girls in the girl band. We were having a bit of we had to change one of the members round. And this particular girl, her dad had always been quite pushy and had been sort of saying, you know, can you get my daughter to sing a few more lines? That's not what you need from, a parent. Can my daughter sing more parts of the songs and all the rest of it? Can she do this? Can she do that? And eventually we had to let her go. And it turns out that her dad was in the East London Mafia. He worked in waste management. I mean, and this was the time of The Sopranos as well. I was like bricking it. So the girls had just done a gig, and we waited until it was a really public place, and we told them we told this girl that she was out of the band, and the mother came up to me and said, "Don't worry, Ari won't do anything stupid."
So, what happened to Stone Fox then?
Well, Stone Fox died of death.
Well, thankfully it wasn't you.
No, exactly. The producer was really worried that there was going to be like a horse's head thrown through his studio window or something like that, or there'd be a mysterious fire or something. But fortunately, I mean, we made her a really nice demo. Gave her a couple of days of studio time to make a really nice demo for her and sent her on her merry way. And we never heard from her or Ari again, fortunately.
So how did you get onto the success of managing Ella Eyre? Because she was huge.
Yeah, so she did all right. So after Stone Fox, there was another couple of artists, and I invited an A&R guy down to, it was an A&R manager guy, and I invited him down to one of the gigs that I put on for one of my other acts. And he said, well, look, I'm not really interested in this particular act, but if you can find someone who's got a really sort of unique tone to her voice, who's like got a lot of stuff going for her, then I'd be interested in sort of coming in and co-managing something for you. And I mentioned this to a friend of mine who, because I've been doing management for a few years, I picked up a few contacts, and I had this guy that worked at the Brit School. He was a vocal coach, actually still is at the Brit School. And so he gets to hear a lot of the talent coming through. So yeah, he's like your eyes and your ears on the ground. And I said to him, is there anybody great coming through? And he said, well, you've got to speak to this girl, Ella. And so I spoke to Ella, and I brought this other guy on board as well. And we picked her up for management. I mean, she was only 15 or 16 at the time, and put her in writing sessions. So because she'd never written a pop song before, so we put her in with producers and writers and developed her up. And at the time, the music industry was much more open to getting into new acts early. And so we had a bit of a bidding war on our hands all of a sudden. And we managed to sign her a publishing deal pretty much as soon as she left Brit, and then a record deal a couple of weeks later. And it just kind of took off. But I think she was really talented, and we were kind of in the right place at the right time. So there was a little bit of luck involved in this.
Did you know at the time that she was going to be the success that she was?
No idea. No, and I'd managed a few other people that weren't. So I was kind of all set for another, not success.
Right, let's just get on to the end of your time at KISS, because you spend 10 years of your career there. Why did you leave KISS?
Well, I got, Andy moved me onto overnights, and when you get moved onto overnights, your time is up. And I think that was because, it was no sort of fault of anything, I don't think, really. It was just because it was time to go. I'd been there for 10 years, and KISS needs to stay fresh and young. And so, yeah, I moved to overnights for 6 months, and then I left. And it was just like, that was that. It was fine.
Must have been quite heart-wrenching to leave KISS after such a long time and such a huge radio station like KISS was.
Yeah, I guess so. There's been worse. I've left radio stations in worse situations before, and actually the KISS one didn't hit me too bad. Maybe I just didn't process it properly, I don't know, but I think I already knew it was coming, because you'd been moved to overnights. It wasn't much of a surprise, and I'd sort of, for the last 6 months, been sort of thinking about what I was going to do anyway, so it wasn't a crushing blow. But yeah, obviously it is a big station, and it was a big station to leave, but yeah, I'd had a good run, and it was fair, it was fine, it was time to go.
We're having a party. Oh, yeah.
So BRMB next in 2011, which is where we meet.
Yes.
And the fascinating fact of this is that, of course, my time at BRMB, it then became Free Radio Birmingham, and you were the first ever voice on Free Radio, James. You swan in and took all the glory.
Yeah, sorry about that. I killed it right from the start. It didn't have a hope with me launching it, did it?
You were there for a year doing evenings. Did you enjoy your time in Birmingham?
Yeah, I did. So obviously shout out to Paul Kay, who was the program director at the time, who brought me in.
Brilliant boss.
I think he's my favourite boss ever.
Really?
Yeah. Because he was so mentoring. He was a really good mentor and a really good coach. And I've never had that before or since from anybody that looks into coaching you in as much detail as he did. And I was thinking about this earlier, and I think it was his use of words. Like, he was really into kind of making sure that you said the right thing. And so he would say things like, don't tell people that you're giving away a pair of tickets for a concert. Sell the experience to them. Say, how would you fancy being at the Oasis reunion show, down the front, lapping up the atmosphere, reliving the 90s, that sort of thing. He would sell the experience. Don't sell the tickets, sell the being there. And it was that sort of thing that he would say all the time. He'd get into the mindset of people, and he would, he was just really good at coaching you that way, I think.
He was a fantastic boss, and up there as one of my favourites as well, because like you say, he was very scientific with things. And sometimes when you'd come off a breakfast show at 10 and then at 10:30, you'd had your fag, you'd had a coffee, and then you had to go into a Snoop session. Perhaps you didn't want that scientific side of things. It was a bit much on a Friday. But he was a fantastic leader, and I'm sure I've told the story before, but I remember we were covering the Birmingham Half Marathon on BRMB, and he said, I'm going to come and sit in the studio whilst you're doing the show. And I'm like, what the hell? I've never had a boss sit there. And he sat next to me with his laptop, and every time I did a link, he was tapping away on the
God.
And I'm thinking,
what's
what's going on here? And at one point, after about 2 hours of this, I was so paranoid, I just got up and went round to see what... He was playing Angry Birds. That's what he was doing. He wasn't making any notes whatsoever. And I'm like, oh my... I've been absolutely papping myself over this, Paul. But, he was a fantastic boss. Really a huge, I would say a huge loss to the industry in this country. He was great.
Yeah, he was good. And he was actually supported by some pretty good people as well. I remember working with Paul Mack. He was helping out on the music side. He was the head of music, and he got a lot of interviews and guests in for my show, because I did the evening show. And that was a kind of an in-demand style radio show, or at least it was attempting to be. And so there was a lot of interviews, a lot of guests, and Paul Mack would book those in. So there were some nice people there. I liked it. The interview that I enjoyed doing the most was with One Direction, because they came in and they were just loving, I think, what they were doing at the time. They were loving life and loving messing about. And this is what I try and do with my kids. I try and put myself into the mindset of the kid. And I tried to put myself into the mindset of One Direction. So when they came in, I just tried to act like I was their age and sort of dick around in the kind of same way that they were dicking around. And I think by doing that, I kind of got them on board, I think.
Yeah. And
I got this story out of one of them who was telling me about this occasion where the cleaner had walked in on him when he was naked and he was doing the windmill, which was something with his spinning it round and round, and the cleaner had walked in. Anyway, we put this on the radio, and they said, oh, this is One Direction's most sexual interview ever.
Fair play, because I tell you what, you did the right tactic there, because they notoriously were quite difficult as well. So that's a good way of doing it, is to bring yourself down to their level, in a sense, isn't it?
They were hilarious, and we crashed the website because we used to do things like, we really plugged that interview that it was happening, and we got people from Birmingham and the West Midlands to put in their questions, and so I had some people some fans ringing up and asking questions to One Direction on the air. And it was quite a successful show, I think, because it crashed the website. Lots of people were listening to free radio from outside the catchment area, and it just completely kiboshed like a service attack from Russia or something. It took down the free radio website.
Well, depending when we put your episode out, that might be quite true to form, the old Russians. Let's get this one out quick, Simon. All right, let's move on. So you spend a year at free radio. You launch free radio. And then 2013, you go to Heart. So tell me about how you got to Heart, because at that point in 2013, that was turning into an absolute machine as well, wasn't it?
Yeah. So, I left free radio kind of by mutual consent. I think probably they were looking to cut. I mean, you probably know this. They were looking to cut costs, weren't they? So there was me doing the evening show and Caroline Martin doing the late show. We both left at the same time, and they replaced us with one program that went across both time slots, which I think was it was a cost-cutting measure, I think, from Free Radio. And at the same time, my wife, who's an Australian, she was my girlfriend at the time, and she was kind of thinking, well, what am I doing living in London with this guy who I don't see at all? Because I would get back home at midnight when she was going to bed, and then I would sleep in the morning when she was going to work. And so we would see each other, if we were lucky, for sort of 15 minutes every day, aside from the weekend. And it was a bit of a stressful time for her. And I was just doing a lot of commuting and all the rest of it. So it worked out quite well. Like that station, that job came to an end for me quite conveniently. And then actually I kind of thought that I was probably going to leave radio for a while because Ella was taking off. Ella had just been signed and things were going quite well there. But I did a little bit. I always kind of like the idea of keeping my hand in radio, just in case the music management thing went south, which it did later on. So it was probably quite a good idea to keep the hand in. So I did a little bit of freelancing for a couple of Heart stations in various different places. And then I got a call from Gary Stein. Is it Steen or Stein? I never knew that.
Gary Steen, I think I called him, but it might be Stein.
I'm not sure. I'm sorry, Gary. I never knew how to pronounce your surname. But anyway, I got a call from Gary, and Gary said, yeah, come to Heart and I did weekend overnights. I did just the one, actually. I just did Saturday because I was kind of doing a regular 9 to 5 doing the music management thing. And so really Saturdays, one show a week was really all I could kind of cope with. So I kept my hand in by doing Friday night into Saturday morning weekend overnight show for 3.5 years.
Did you enjoy? I mean, it's strange, isn't it? Because you go from being on Kiss for 10 years to then, a little bit of time at Free, but then go to Heart, which Kiss and Heart, two completely different beasts, aren't they? Did you find that transition difficult?
I think probably after every show, I used to walk home because I lived fairly centrally and I could walk home. And I would consider whether I actually wanted to keep doing it or not. Almost after every show. Because it was a really brutal show to do. It was, 1 till 6? I think it was 1 till 6. And I would come in an hour early and I would pre-record the links for the last hour first, so that come 5 a.m. I could just sit there and play out the links where I was still sounding sprightly. I could play out the links I'd recorded 4 or 5 hours earlier. But it was a 5-hour overnight show, and I would already done a full day's work managing Ella. I would go home, I'd have 2 hours sleep, get up, have some dinner, go into work, and then work all the way through till 6 in the morning. And it was brutal. And so, yeah, almost on a weekly basis, I questioned whether I wanted to keep doing it.
Did you carry on just to keep your hand in the game?
Yeah, pretty much. And also because it's hard, it's a big station, obviously the biggest commercial radio station now. It was probably the biggest commercial radio station then, to be honest, because it had already gone, spread itself out onto all these different other local stations. So part of me was like, well, I'm working at the biggest commercial radio station. You don't really want to just give that up easily because it's the sort of thing that everybody wants to do. And yet it was a brutal shift to do. And if I'm honest, it's not the most creative radio, and you'll know that. It's it does what it does extremely well. But I've been on other radio stations where you get more freedom and you have more fun as a presenter, and that's quite important to me. Like I think I obviously I'm doing it for a job, but I'm also doing it because I love it. And on other radio stations that I've worked at before and since, I've had more fun.
2018, you spend a lot of time at Heart, but then you move to Virgin Radio, or should I say you go back? Because of course you kind of made the full loop, haven't you? You've gone back to Virgin in 2018.
Yeah, and that really is great. I mean, I love Virgin Radio. I'm not just saying that because I'm working on it at the moment. It's actually the station that's the ideal station for me. But 2018 was a bit of a shitter, if I'm honest, at the start of the year, because I didn't leave Heart because I wanted to. I left Heart because a new PD came in and decided to make a change. In fact, I'm going to tell you this. I was debating whether to tell you this story or not, but
Go on, do it, James, do it.
I will tell you this, but it was a bit silly on my behalf. So anyway, here we go. So I've been asked by Gary to cover the breakfast show on Heart 80s. So I've been there for 3.5 years, right? And most of the time it was just overnights. So no one really saw me. And I had my station pass was on a lanyard, and the lanyard was the KISS lanyard, right? Yeah. They'd never given me, in my defense, a global lanyard. They'd just given me the pass on its own. And so I just attached it. I'm a radio enthusiast. So I attached it to a KISS lanyard. And for 3.5 years, I'd worn this into the global building. Subterfuge, having the KISS logo in the global building for 3.5 years, and they didn't know. But then I was doing the breakfast show on Heart 80s, and I went into the kitchen to make myself a coffee, and a girl came up to me, and she was like, "That's a KISS lanyard." I'm like, "Oh, I know, it's good, isn't it?" And she's like, "No, it's not good." Anyway, it turns out, and I didn't know this at the time, it turns out she was Richard Park's PA.
Hey.
Yeah, and she had an absolute fit over the fact that I had a KISS lanyard around my neck, and I was treating it, because you know what it's like when you're doing the breakfast show. You're on a bit of a kind of high. And
yeah.
You're buzzing from the enthusiasm and the adrenaline. You're probably buzzing from the coffees as well. And I was just like, I was just taking it quite lightheartedly and not really thinking about too much of it. She was having this absolute fit, and of course she runs off to Richard Park and dumps me in it. So then when it came to contract renewal time, and I don't know whether the lanyard thing was what did it or not, but I didn't have my contract renewed at Heart. And if it's the lanyard that did it, well, then so be it. It probably did me a favour, because then, yes, as you say, I went to Virgin Radio.
Well, I mean, I've got to say, you're the first guest on Crunch and Roll who's lost a gig from wearing the wrong lanyard.
I know, yeah.
Well done, mate. Well
in
done.
retrospect, obviously, it was a bit of a silly thing to be doing, but there we go. Everyone's done silly things, haven't they?
Well, yeah, but there's worse things in life than wearing the wrong lanyard.
I didn't get the station fined.
All right, let's move on to Virgin. So how did the move back to Virgin happen for you?
Yeah, so I knew I was going. You just get this feeling that you're going to leave a radio station. I've had that a couple of times. I knew I was off. And on the last day, what I thought was going to be my last day at Heart, and it was, I went into the radio station at midnight, and I spent the entire night making some demo tapes. I thought, well, we've got access to a studio. Let's make the most of it. So I recorded 3 demos, and they all had exactly the same music on them and exactly the same links that I'd scripted. I just did 3 different radio stations. So at the time, these stations were all playing the same songs. There was overlap in these songs. So Radio X, Absolute, and Virgin. And I made identical demos for those 3 stations. I've always found that if you want to get a job on the radio, if you do a tailored demo for a PD, it kind of works, or it helps, because you're showing you that you've made the effort to actually listen to their station and make something specifically for them. I think it starts you off on the right footing if you make a tailored demo. So this is what I did. So I made 3 demos for those 3 stations, and I got no response from Radio X, probably because Richard Parker tipped them off.
Otherwise known as Lanyard Gates.
That's it, yeah. I got a lovely response from Paul Sylvester at Absolute, but he had nothing going at the time. And Mike Cass called me in and got me to do some cover, and I've been there ever since. And actually, when I started, it wasn't the station it is now, because I started about a month before Chris was announced. Chris Evans was announced coming back to the breakfast show on Virgin Radio. And so when I started, Virgin Radio was not much of a force at the time. Mike had only joined recently. He was in the process of turning it round. But I think then the whole thing just took on a new level. Chris joined. At the same time, they moved into these brand new studios in London Bridge, 17 floors up, look over London.
I've been, it's amazing.
Isn't it incredible? Like the best view from any radio station that I've ever been in. And also they did this thing where they got on some more transmitters. So they're on D2, but they broadened the number of transmitters. And so overnight, everything got better. And I think I'm a big believer in your game is raised or lowered depending on the sort of atmosphere and the building of the radio station. So if you're in Virgin was in quite a pokey little space in Hatfields at the bottom of Talk Sport, and it was not glamorous at all. And I think maybe that might have reflected in the output a little bit. And then when it went to the news building and Chris Evans joined, and everything just raised, the game just rose so high, everybody that was on the station got better, because you just get brought up by the atmosphere and the people that you're working with and the surroundings that you're working in.
And what are the plans for you? Just to carry on enjoying Virgin as long as you can?
Yeah, I mean, I'm getting more work there than I've had before. I do a sort of regular Sunday night shift there, and I do a lot of cover. So I cover the weekend breakfast show, cover the early breakfast show, sometimes cover lunch times or drive time. I've covered every single shift on the station, I think.
Well, what's it like working with Chris Evans? We have to talk about him because he's one of the biggest names in UK radio. Do you get to see him much?
Well, I've obviously worked with Chris Evans twice, because I worked with Chris when he owned Virgin Radio the first time round. Okay,
well, I overlooked that part.
Yeah, we didn't talk about that. Well, yeah, so he was my boss. And when he ran Virgin Radio, I was quite in awe of him, really. It was my first proper radio gig, and he was the big breakfast presenter, and I felt quite nervous around him. And he was also because he owned the radio station with investors, he was very invested in the success of the station. So he'd come into programming meetings and he'd have a bit of a go at the presenters and, come on, you've got to try harder, because it was his baby. Yeah. And although there was also a huge fun element at the radio station, which we talked about, which was a lot of it was led by him. So it was kind of like this real party place, but you've got to work. It's work hard, play hard. That's what it was always like when he owned the station. And when he sold it, he gave everybody there a bonus. I think he gave us all a 10% of our salary as a bonus, which was a really nice thing for him to have done. So that was the first time round, and now it's different because he doesn't own the station now, and he's just doing it because I think he's doing it because he loves the brand. I think that's why he came back to Virgin Radio, because he likes the name Virgin Radio. He likes what the brand values are. It's kind of a little bit sort of, obviously Richard Branson and that whole kind of thing, and it's a cool name anyway, isn't it? Virgin is a cool name for a radio station. I think he's doing it because he likes the brand and he likes the freedom. No one's going to really tell him that he can't do something. So he's having a whale of a time. And he's always very nice to me. So
you can't ask for any more than that.
You can't.
Oh, yeah.
You're also doing a lot of voiceover work. We can hear your voice on Channel 4, Warner Music, Mitsubishi, Nokia. Some big hitters there as well, James. Can I just say this is possibly one of my favourite episodes of Crunch and Roll I think we've done in ever.
Oh, that's nice of you. Thanks, John.
It's been really, really interesting. And, a couple of questions which I often ask many of my guests. Who do you like in the industry, or, past or present? Who do you enjoy listening to on the radio?
Well, I mean, we mentioned Nick Abbott earlier. I love what Nick Abbott's doing on the radio, even now on LBC. I think he sounds great. Simon Mayo, I've always really enjoyed as a presenter. Greg James on Radio 1 is brilliant. He's if I could do but just like a fraction of what he's doing. He just nails it.
And also, I want to know, because it's not until you write down your career, which, I've done here for you to record your episode. Do you look at your CV and go, bloody hell, I really have been successful? Because nobody can argue that, James. Kiss, Heart, Virgin, some major players. How does it make you feel to look at that and to talk about it?
I'm pretty proud of it, to be honest. Yeah, there's some great stations, and I've been able to work with a lot of great people, Yeah, I've really enjoyed the ride so far, and I just hope it continues for as long as possible, really, because it's fun, and I feel very lucky. A lot of this is, some of it's hard work, but some of it's just luck. It was just luck that I happened to be working in the programming department when they fired a whole bunch of presenters and realised they needed to put someone on the evening show. So I've just been in the right place at the right time a few times and tried to make the best out of it.
And we started this episode talking about your children. Do they think you're one of the coolest dads on the planet, being on the radio?
I don't think so. No, I don't think your kids ever think you're cool, do they? And you know what? It's only going to get worse. They're only going to think I'm less cool the older they get. They're currently 7 and 10. So I guess they just they understand it because they'll hear me doing a radio show. So they kind of know what I do, but I don't think it really means particularly much to them. And as they get older, they'll probably be embarrassed because I'll be playing stuff that is way too old for them.
Do you know, I've got two girls, Rosie and Elsie. Rosie's 12, Elsie's 9. And we've got a bar at the end of the garden. It's called The Fox. Of course it is. And inside The Fox, and my wife hates this room because she says it's very Alan Partridge, but I've essentially got lots of pictures of me from my time working in the industry.
Yeah.
And you'll know, we have a sense of pride, don't we, when we think back to some of the things that we've done throughout our career. And I've taken my girls into the bar and I've walked them along the Fox Gallery, as we call it. And there's a picture of me with Tony Christie singing Is This the Way to Amarillo live on stage in Bridlington. Pretty rock and roll, James.
Oh, yeah.
There's me with Westlife. There's me with Charlene Spiteri. And my girls couldn't give a shit. Absolutely.
But as long as you're happy, John, that's what it's about, isn't it, really?
I am. I sit in there most evenings with a tear in my eye, thinking back to the good old days before children. James, it's been lovely to see you again after so many years, and I genuinely mean it. It has been one of my favourite episodes ever. So thank you very much for being on Crunch and Roll. Would you be so kind in your best Mitsubishi voice to please end with the end credits?
Thank you, John. It's been a pleasure to be on. You've been listening to Crunch and Roll with me, James Merritt. Subscribe or follow us on your favourite podcast app to get every new episode as soon as they drop. Crunch and Roll is a 969 media production presented by John Fox and produced by Simon Broski.